The OHMI Trust is focused, as you know, on one very specific problem. That is how we get musical instruments for people with some physical disability that can match those of the professional orchestra, the jazz bands, rock groups, that can sit side by side with other musicians. So there can be undifferentiated participation by everybody in musical life. However, one very interesting place to start this conversation, if we may, is on the nature of the note itself, because electronic instruments tend to produce pre-programmed sounds. They start, they carry on, they stop as they're programmed to do. The amount of control that the individual has, the musician has, over that note is fairly limited. And when you stretch that note into a piece of music, the limitations become all the more obvious, and particularly with an instrument like the trumpet. Is this something you're conscious of, that you've thought about at all before?
I have thought about this before because somebody said to me quite recently, in fact, that if you took the beginning of the trumpet and you just heard the middle of the sound just played very straight, you wouldn't be able to tell what the instrument was. It would just be it's just a sound, really, and it's really the articulation, the attack, the shape of the note that gives it its life and its character, and even tells you what the instrument is. When I'm teaching, I talk very much about the front of the note. There can be this very hard, obvious attack, or there can be something that's very subtly different, which is where instead of attacking the note, you come away from the note with as much force, but you think away. So it's very much a concept. Maybe physically it's very, very subtle, but it's something that in your head would completely change the character of how the sound is.
That's actually a really interesting point, because that is essentially the main difficulty, that is trying to work out what's going on in the body and how that translates into the instrument. The adaptions, I should say, don't have this problem, of course. They have a lot of physical, mechanical difficulties with them, but the electronic routes, and a lot of people seem to be taking that route among our competitors, is really difficult, that they have to work out exactly what's going on when you describe those processes that are essentially psychological, how they manifest themselves in a physical change. How does it work?
Yeah, it's probably an endless problem. When you first approached me about this and told me all about it, it's fascinating. But I imagine the mechanical side of it is probably the easiest way to overcome this particular part of it, because music making is so much more than noises and notes. It's about being able to express yourself. And you know, I play the trumpet, but I don't really think about the fact I play the trumpet that much. I think of it more as if I play music and I happen to use the trumpet as my vehicle. And I think that's the key, that you have to be able to express yourself, and just mere notes and noise and pitch is not going to express. You're not going to express yourself with notes. You need to be able to do it with shaping it, and much more importantly, shaping a phrase, which you do by shaping each note, of course, and joining it to the next one exactly as you want to, and that's how it becomes your voice.
And this is an instantaneous process. There's no time between you wanting a sound to be in a particular way, and that sound appearing.
Exactly, you can't plan it.
No.
I mean, you can to an extent. You know, you think, well, I want this phrase to be very gentle and very flowing, and each note will be very soft into the next one. But really, it has to be left to be spontaneous. Otherwise, it's not. You know, it's like when you hear a computer recording of, you know, when you phone to pay a bill and they say all the numbers, and it's like, yeah, I completely understand you, but if you was trying to seduce me, that's not. It's not going to work.
No, quite. I was listening to one of your CDs with the spiritual on it. Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen, and I was thinking there that if you were to play that with those pre-programmed notes, without the expressiveness that's intimate, the voice, if you like, the singing that metaphorically that goes through the instrument, how would it sound? Would it be? Could it be? It would be
so boring.
It would be completely, wouldn't it?
It would be so boring, because it's actually a really simple melody, and it's a very simple arrangement of a simple melody. What it has is actually multi-tracked muted trumpets underneath with this very static chord progression. You know, it hardly changes through the whole piece, and then you just have this trumpet line, and the whole quality of that track is the fact that it's trying to sound as much like a human voice as possible, or as much as like something being emotional and something being expressive as possible. And you know, there's a lovely resonance on the sound because of the room that I was in, but actually it's nothing to do with the notes. The notes are really quite standard, you know, in a G major scale. There's nothing harmonically that outrageous, and I think people can easily forget. You know, if you listen to a symphony orchestra and you hear all the fast notes and the amazing harmony and the harmonic progressions, you forget that it's, of course, that's amazing, but it won't do anything to you if it's not played in a certain way.
Exactly. So turn that towards the reward you get as a musician in doing this, because the reason for playing music, first of all, is about the individual. And for the experiences that children and adults should be having, that they're currently prevented from having, is one that's profoundly important to the individual, I believe. But is that something you could find ways to think or express or share? Do you take that same view? Are you doing it for others, or are you doing it for yourself?
Oh, both actually. But I take your view, and I'm in complete agreement. And I also find that when I practice, I'm practicing as a sort of craftsman, I'm very technical and very making sure everything's working. And this is quite dull, really. It's just a case of putting the time in to make sure that it's, you know, it's just preparation. It's not performance. It's not really music. It's just kind of making sure you're familiar enough with everything. Yeah. It's only when you choose to perform, even if you're on your own, or you're with other people, or you're on the stage, of course. That's when it becomes real. That's when it's alive, and when it's and when it moves you, even as a player, when you feel like something magical has happened. When your mindset is just slightly, it's in a different place. You know, as a performer, you have your practice, but then you have your performing life, and that's the thing that nourishes your soul. Forgive me sounding kind of pretentious, but it really does.
No, not at all. I think it's something that pianist Jörg Demas said to me many years ago about forgetting all those practice. He would practice even seconds before they would drag him onto the stage to play. He was still practicing technically, and then he said he would just completely dismiss all that, and then allow the person to do the playing. But that's the point. The person, to do that performance, to give that performance, you then need that instrument to have a facility that's completely at one with your mind.
That's right. I mean, actually, it's an interesting point for me, and something that's very personal to me as a trumpet player, because I'm a classical trumpet soloist, and actually we are very limited with our classical repertoire in comparison to the violin or the piano or many other instruments. And the reason for this is simply because of the technological advancements with the instrument, and the fact that there was a complete stop in the development of the instrument in precisely the time that Beethoven, Brahms, you know, all sorts of incredible composers were writing their concertos. And I had, you know, as a trumpet player, there was very little going on then. And that's just because we didn't have people having this particular conversation, and you know, thoughts like the OHMI Trust are trying to inspire and spark and ignite somebody extraordinary, saying, what are we going to do with the trumpet? How can we make this the problem? It's a wonderful instrument, but it's missing loads of notes of the scale. You know, it's very clunky, difficult to use. It's not really working well, and so the greatest composers stopped writing for it. And it was only the technological revolution of the instrument in France, actually, in the 19th century, that then meant it had this renaissance, and now it's up there as virtuosic as any of the other instruments.
Mr. Albin, is that
exactly?
Yes.
Exactly. Yes. When he invented the cornet à piston, you know, these pistons on the cornet.
Damn him. Yes.
And
hard book.
But that was a really interesting moment for the trumpet, because there was centuries of time when the instrument was wonderful but had a lot lacking, you know, just with the technology. So
then the concerto is obviously an opportunity for you to express as a musician something very particular. You're in charge. You've got the capability, even more than the conductor, to define how this whole thing will sound. But actually you're also playing with others, and there's got to be another set of experiences with other people, which is another layer of pleasure, of reward, that is also something that we want to allow people the the pleasure of experiencing. It's an extraordinary feeling, I think,
Yeah.
to be a part of
That's
that.
right, to be part of
music
this
making.
great engine
Yeah,
that is an
yeah,
orchestra.
yeah, yeah. And every piece of it is somehow hearing every other piece or
That's it.
feeling it.
Yeah.
So it's not much listening, is it?
Which is what's extraordinary, and even more so if you're an orchestral player, I think, than a soloist, because as a soloist, you know, you're doing your big showing off bit, and then the orchestra is expected to follow you and come with you. If you're playing in the orchestra, you have to be brilliant and perfect, but you have to be totally in tune with what everyone else is doing, and it makes you use a part of your brain that you didn't even know you had, you know, because you're having to think on so many levels. You're trying to express yourself, be spontaneous, make an interesting and beautiful and convincing sound, and yet fit into all the other parts. And that's what everyone else is trying to do at exactly the same time, which is extraordinary. But it does mean that the technology of all the instruments has to be absolutely 100%.
Yes, and every instrument there has to be so infinitely controllable that they can fit. It's not just pitch, is it, or it's tone, it's sensitive depth to the whole music making that is unified.
Yeah, absolutely.
In that
I
process.
mean, I think anyone who's watched a film and, you know, felt themselves, you know, possibly they're going to cry or something at an emotional moment, that's usually created by some powerful live recording of probably an orchestra, actually, half the time, and it's a world away from this, you know, kind of Casio keyboard sound, you know, which is just because that's not. It's very, very clever, but it's not going to touch you in the way that the music is designed to touch one.
Quite. And this is the amount of music we hear which is played in this way. I mean, there is a lot of computer-generated music sounds and so on, and in film as well. But that has its place. But the vast majority is still produced as it has been for centuries.
Oh no,
in the way
it's an incredible marriage between technology and the latest electronic sounds and instruments and equipment and the live instruments, and that's why it's so powerful, because we have all these sounds that perhaps we've never heard before, you know, they've just been invented for this particular film or whatever it is, but then we have the live instruments add the emotion, which is why it's so powerful. And you know, people who go to see films or go to concerts, they don't need to know about the technology, they just need to be moved. And so to have this facility to shape is absolutely vital.
You played your last CD is on a natural trumpet.
That's right.
So how does this compare? The facility here is quite different, isn't it? It's at least you don't have the mechanical, same number of mechanical devices. You've got to do a lot more yourself in pitch and sound and compensation as well. How does that feel as an experience compared to the trumpet? And remembering this about the sort of music making, the nature of the mechanical instrument.
Well, actually, for me, I should just explain this. Natural trumpet it's almost like playing your garden hose pipe. It's so simple. It's just literally a mouthpiece and then just a long pipe and then a bell. No valves, no slides or anything else.
Has it got any holes in it?
It has holes, but this is obviously for the modern ear, for tuning. The holes don't make the notes. And everything else is done with your breath control and your lip muscles and just a really strong imagination of what you want it to sound like. And why I love it so much is because it is actually the instrument that Bach, Handel, Purcell, it's the instrument they had available, and they were absolute, you know, masters. They knew how to write for the inflections that the instrument had, and so to me it makes perfect sense of the music. But as I said earlier, the technique of the trumpet means, you know, you're only playing the notes of the harmonic scale, which is sort of da 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 da, and then as you go higher and higher, they get a bit closer together, which is where you can start playing scalic tunes. But it does mean there's so many notes not available. So, but it's a wonderful instrument because you can still express yourself. In fact, you can express yourself easier because you have no. It's almost like less between your body and the listener.
Yes. So does the old piccolo trumpet become a bit of a brute compared to the subtleties of the?
Yeah, I mean, I do love. There's a definite place for the piccolo trumpet. I mean, the great French trumpeter Maurice André was an incredible exponent of the piccolo trumpet. Just made this such sweet and heartbreaking sound. so there's a place for it in my heart. But at the moment, I'm so in love with this natural trumpet and this sound, this vocal yet thrilling sound that I'm really sort of shunning the piccolo trumpet at the moment.
Listening to Bach on the natural trumpet, instead of this, being a bit risky here with what I'm saying, but the dominance of or the capability of dominance of the piccolo trumpet, you suddenly retreats back into this much softer, much more blended sound altogether, and it's as if, well, that's what he meant. Suddenly it kind of makes sense. Like listening to, Beethoven and the sort of rasping horns at the end of the Eroica, you think, well, God, that's what he meant. Yeah. And then only when they get back to those instruments can it actually be achieved. It makes it all seem natural somehow. And I thought that's something about the instrument, that no matter how good the player, there's got to be this relationship with something very, very physical and the person that ultimately is the solution.
That's
so
right.
Very,
Absolutely.
very difficult.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because, it's always seen that technology and technological advancement is good and lack of it is bad. But of course, sometimes it just takes you away from the point of what you were trying to make work as successfully as possible. It just it makes a distance between you and, particularly in classical music, how it was written.
When you start to learn an instrument, and it is a very mechanical process at the beginning, the challenge that we face with the instruments is a sort of parallel to this. I think that the instruments that are likely to be available or coming through the competition in the next year achieve a certain distance in where we're going. In the same way that I can imagine a young trumpeter learning those first few scales, those first few tunes, and it being quite mechanical and not really as yet a means of expression, of self-expression, and possibly even the experience of playing with others is also a little bit individualized, and it goes through processes in the same way our instruments have to get more and more sophisticated to be able to be simpler, to the point you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, that's
somehow it's a process of simplifying, in that the body can have responses or an interaction with this instrument that's more and more direct, more subtle. And as it goes on, this process of intimacy with the instrument also grows. I think there's a sort of parallel ground here. But is that your experience too in this process of learning? There comes a point where you begin finally to find yourself within it and express yourself.
Yes, absolutely. When I started, I had a wonderful teacher at my primary school, and very soon after I started to play, and I just had a few notes, we played in a brass group, and we played a Bach chorale. I think it was called Jesu Priceless Treasure, and it was, I remember, I think I was only about 9, but I remember thinking, this is so beautiful, and it obviously, Bach is hard to kill on any level, so it was always going to sound pretty okay. But just playing with other people and realising it was just, even though I could only play a few notes, I wasn't, it wasn't very good, I was really young, I realised that there was something much more going on than just the notes. And then obviously that's what I aim for. And I think because that happened to me when I was young and I had this great inspiring teacher, I realised that was the point of it from the start. I never played because I was just wanting to play the notes and see how high I could get or fast. I really realised from the beginning that there was something you couldn't put your finger on. And it's really hard to talk about as well, this thing that music fast tracks to your, through to your emotions. And so that's what has been my, every day I practice, or every time I go on stage, or every time, I have to go and get on another aeroplane and I don't want to. It doesn't matter, because I know what's driving me to do it, because it might be another moment where you think, I don't know why this is really special, but it really is. And that's why musicians, that's why it's so important, to both listeners, but even more so to the player themselves, because it does really, it's so satisfying, that feeling when you can't describe quite what happened, but it really was like the closest thing to magic.
This isn't an add-on to life. This isn't something that is nice if you can get it. You know, this isn't a nice new sports car or a lovely day in the sun or in the country. This is something that is deep and profound, something very, very meaningful to not just your life. I mean, that's why I wanted perhaps not to differentiate between your exceptional skill and ability and somebody who's much, much lower down in the learning experience. But it's still got that, I'm hoping you're going to agree, that exceptional relationship with life itself, with
Absolutely.
with the person.
And I don't see any difference. You know, I'm very lucky that I can play music, and that's what I do for a living. But I don't see it like a job. I see it it's and I don't even see it like that it's my life or my lifestyle. I see it as it's actually integral to who I am as a person, as a human being, because I've been so lucky to be introduced when I was a child, and I just fell more and more deeply in love with it. But it makes no difference on what level you participate. It's just about whether you participate, and that makes you a more nourished human being. That's the only way I can say it. And it provides things that there's nothing else in life that can be the substitute to it. I mean, it's well documented that with babies and very young children, they are it has incredibly positive results in all sorts of ways, you know, with IQ and with concentration and with just being calm and being soothed, and, you know, it has countless benefits. And yet it's something that's, I mean, I feel sorry for people who don't have it in their lives, or, I mean, most people do have it in their lives on some level, but I want to kind of help get the message across to as many people as possible that it's really important. Nothing to do with whether you're going to have it as your job when you're older. You know, it's about having something in your life that's really satisfying and enjoyable and nourishes a part of you. There's just no substitute, as I say. And I once had a friend who we were going skydiving, and she's a musician as well, performer, and I said, so how was it, you know, because everyone's saying it's the most thrilling thing you'll ever do, and they said it's not that incredible, because it's, you know, you only have that split second where, you know, something is exciting. The rest of it is kind of just, it's done, it's out of your control, if you like. And it's about the fact that you're in control of your destiny whilst you're playing the music. You know, it's all ahead of you that makes it so thrilling. And so you know, it can be a real roller coaster ride, or it can just be very soothing. And I think that's why, well, one of the many reasons why it's so sort of addictive as well. I feel as a musician, I can't show my support strongly enough for the OHMI project. I think the OHMI Trust is bringing attention to these very things we've been talking about. You know, the fact that music is more than notes and noise. There's something absolutely much more special.